Hello, my name is Greg Madison, and this is The Living Process. Welcome back. This is the last episode for the summer. Hopefully, be back in autumn. And my guest this time is Gugga Jóhannesdóttir. And Gugga is one of a growing number of philosophers who are coming into the focusing world. She works with the Embodied Critical Thinking group, teaches TAE, and is a certified focusing trainer. And she's also involved in the Freedom to Make Sense project. In this episode, Gugga and I talk about her research into landscape, the creative process, aesthetics, her understanding of beauty, which is, yeah, very profound. And we talk a little bit about the tourist experience and how it could be deepened so that it isn't just a spectator experience, but is a more deeply connecting experience between the person and the environment, and how that can actually influence our desire to care for the environment. I very much enjoyed this episode. I felt like I learned a lot from Gugga and her enthusiasm for research and kind of the rigors of understanding the structure of experience. I hope you enjoy this episode with Gugga. And in the notes, you can find a link to more of her work. Hello, welcome back to The Living Process. And this time, my special guest is Gugga from Iceland. Welcome.
Thank you.
Okay. I've had a look at some of your work and it looks very fascinating. So I'm really looking forward to hearing from you why these different topics feel important to you and how you maybe add focusing to them or use focusing to explore them or whatever. But
Mhm,
first of all, um, I would be curious just to hear how you found focusing, how you, yeah, got
mhm.
introduced to it.
Yeah, that was in 2015. I had just finished my PhD on environmental aesthetics and the aesthetic experience of landscape.
Mhm.
And my supervisor in my PhD was Sigríður Þorgeirsdóttir. And she was during the winter 2014 to 15, I think it was. She was a guest professor in Helsinki, in the University of Helsinki for a whole winter. And at the end of that winter, I came also to Helsinki to do a Nord Plus teaching program for a few weeks, and I stayed with her. And then she had gotten to know focusing through a Finnish philosopher called Virpi Lehtinen.
Okay.
And when I came to Helsinki, Sigga tells me, you have to know about this method called focusing, and here's the book, and gave me the book by Gendlin. And just on the first pages, I thought, oh, this I know this. This
Mhm.
is this is very familiar. This is what happens when I go and walk by the river, and this is what happens when I'm in nature. And then I think I had like two sessions, just private lessons with Virpi.
Mhm.
Um, and I immediately was just in it, and, uh, was very kind of, it felt like somehow like coming home in a way.
Mhm.
And and I just remember, after the first session with her, I came out like I felt like I was walking on a cloud, because something that had been kind of tensing me up for the last few weeks, it had just been there, stuck in my body, and then just through a very simple process, it was kind of, whew. So it was very kind of I had big felt shifts
Hmm.
very immediately. And and then of course me and Sigga immediately started doing this kind of listening with each other while I was there, and we realized how familiar this also felt, to the process that we had been in together for many years during my PhD. That there was some kind of this type of listening that we had been doing intuitively,
Hmm.
without really having a name for a method of what we were doing. So that was my first kind of introduction to it. And then a year later, uh, Sigga and Donata and Virpi and others organized. There was a summer school on like a feminist philosophy summer school in Iceland,
Okay.
where Donata came and introduced thinking at the edge, and that's when I first got to know that method, and that was like a liberation for me as a philosopher. And then just after that summer school, I did a weekend course of focusing, and immediately thought, I want to learn more, and I want to teach this. I want others to experience what I'm experiencing now. This
Mhm.
kind of new feeling of freedom somehow. So yeah, that since then I've been just learning more and more.
Okay.
Yeah.
So for you, it sounds like it was very much uh, kind of a confirmation of what was already quite natural for you,
Yeah.
but maybe making it somehow a little more explicit.
Yeah. Just making it explicit.
Yeah.
Eh, because it was, as soon as I got to know this method, I recognized it, but
Mhm.
I also recognized that although it had played such an important role in my life and in my philosophical thinking,
Yeah.
I was absolutely unaware of it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So being aware of it, making me then able to use it more kind of directly and
Hmm.
intentionally was such a huge shift.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. That once you're aware of it, then you can intentionally call upon it rather than just waiting for it to naturally arise.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know that makes a lot of sense to me.
Hmm.
And so it's interesting. I always like hearing when people come to focusing not through the therapy route because that's what I'm most familiar with. So it's nice to hear that increasingly it's at least in your group,
Hmm.
it's sort of starting to come in through academia and philosophy.
Yeah, yeah.
And I'm curious then, I'm not exactly sure how to ask the question. It doesn't quite seem right to say, what are your interests?
Mm-hmm.
Because when reading your papers, it doesn't sound as abstract as an interest, the sorts of philosophy and writing that you do. Could you tell us a little bit of just your main kind of passions in the area of research and philosophy?
Mm. Yeah. So I kind of came to philosophy unexpectedly and kind of randomly. I used to study how to play the piano as a kid,
Oh.
and a teenager, and that was kind of I had my path laid out in my mind. I was like, okay, this is my path,
Hmm.
music. And then when I come out of high school and come to the real music school here in the city, I was brought up outside of the city,
Mhm.
and then I realized how narrow the path in music was at the time. It was just if you're going to be a classical musician, a concert pianist, and that's the path that is offered here. And I realized, oh, that's actually not something that I want. I just like music and I want to have music in my life, but I don't want to be a classical concert pianist. And at the time, that was very kind of, there wasn't many other paths of like higher education in music then. So I kind of dropped out and did some, art workshops and, just kind of learning all sorts of things, photography and stuff like that for a few months. And then I decided, well, I want to try out the university. And I came to philosophy because it seemed most fun, and,
Wow.
and uh, and then I was there, and still I felt like, well, we're learning all of these things about these ancient guys and what they said, and what has it to do with my life right here, right now, and the society I'm living in. And I
Mhm.
was a little bit frustrated with how abstract it was.
Mhm.
And then I got to know environmental philosophy, philosophy of nature, environmental ethics. And then I felt, this is something, there was something that kind of, it moved something in me. It resonated with something in my experience, that this was important. And so I did my BA thesis on environmental ethics, and then I went to Lancaster in the UK and did an MA program called MA in Values and Environment.
Mm.
It was one of the first in the world that focused specifically on environmental philosophy, and I learned a lot during the year that I was there, and then when I got to know environmental aesthetics, which was something that I hadn't gotten familiar with before, and this was kind of my introduction to aesthetics, through looking at the aesthetic experience of nature,
Mhm.
and and then when I got back, I this kind of opportunity to do a PhD on the concept of landscape kind of came into my hands. And I wasn't specifically planning on doing a PhD, but when I was asked, okay, we have this concept of landscape, we have this problem in environmental decision making here in Iceland. We don't know how to deal with this landscape value. And we just know that we have to kind of understand this better in the Icelandic context. Do you see any kind of perspective from your studies that could shed a light on this? And then environmental aesthetics was an obvious kind of context for looking at this.
Mhm.
So then I thought, okay, I'll do a PhD if it's something useful, something that can actually, maybe have an effect on things here. So that has been my kind of main field, this
Mhm.
environmental ethics, environmental aesthetics. But through my PhD work, when I interviewed people about their aesthetic experience of nature,
Mhm.
I realized something that I hadn't, been much aware of before, is that when people have aesthetic experiences, for example, I interviewed people about having been on the glacier, and they came down from the glacier. No one had been lecturing them about climate change or giving them any rational arguments for why they should, change their behavior or, think something about their relation to nature. And they came down describing their experience to me, how all the colors and the smells and the, forms and everything had kind of captured their whole attention. And then they expressed, all of them expressed the same thing. I felt so small, and I realized, hearing the water melt in the glacier, that there's something here going on, and I have a responsibility. What's my role here in this situation? So I understood that, wow, just by smelling and breathing in and, being in the glacier,
Mhm.
you learn something that we are so desperately trying to teach people through
Mhm.
logical arguments and
Mhm.
convincing them, look, it's all going to hell, we have to do something. And people
Yeah.
just, they don't react,
Yeah.
they rather go into some kind of kind of denial mode
Yeah.
when they hear all of these arguments, you know. So, but feeling it in a bodily way is something different, you know. And then at the same time, I was asked to start teaching in the arts education department in the Arts University in Iceland. And then it all came together, you know, because that's what they emphasize, you know, we learn through the arts is learning through experience, you
Yeah.
know. It was the same kind of thing going on, learning through experiencing nature and experiencing art. You know, it's kind of this embodied understanding.
So let me ask, I mean, that sounds fascinating to me. I want to just go back a little bit, and I feel like I'm beginning to get a sense now. I can hear in sort of your academic story
Hmm.
where things really came together for you, and I can see where focusing enters. But I want to just go back a bit. Can you just say a little bit about what environmental aesthetics
Hmm.
covers?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So environmental aesthetics is a field that kind of came to life maybe again, or you know, well, for the first time as this, you know, field with this name in the 60s, 70s. There was a British philosopher called Ronald Hepburn who wrote this paper that is often, you know, connected with this beginning of this field. It was called Contemporary Aesthetics and the Neglect of Natural Beauty. So when aesthetics first became like a field within philosophy in the, you know, 18th century, it was always, you know, people like Immanuel Kant was one of the first ones who did like a big comprehensive account of aesthetics. They were always talking about the aesthetic experience of nature and the aesthetic experience of art. You know, so both were always there in the beginning.
Mhm.
And when Baumgarten kind of, you know, said this should be a field within philosophy, he named it, you know, the science of sensory knowledge directed towards beauty. So very kind of very open, you know, much more open than it later became somehow narrowed down to just philosophy of art.
Uh-huh. Okay.
So, you know, in the middle of the 20th century, if you would have any kind of anthology on aesthetics, it would have a subtitle, The Philosophy of Art, you know. So it became narrowed down to just looking at art. Um, and then, you know, in the 60s, there was people all around, you know, people in Finland, people in Canada, people in UK, and the United States, you know, it seemed to have been at the same time kind of discovering, hey, we should also be talking about nature in
Hmm.
aesthetics.
Hmm.
Why aren't we discussing nature in aesthetics? So, so that became kind of a field who looks at, you know, our aesthetic experience of nature and what kind of meaning and value is there, you know. And this is, you know, also been kind of, people have been talking about this in relation to environmental decision making, because when we are, you know, doing decisions that regard the natural environment, we have all of these values that we have to take into account, and this value is often left out, you know, and not acknowledged and not named. And this is the, you know, when I learned about environmental aesthetics when I was in the UK, there was like this huge debate on environmental values and decisions being made here in Iceland. And many people, especially artists, but a lot of people were arguing we cannot sacrifice this natural area because it's unique, it's beautiful, you know, it's something that, you know, and that was an argument that wasn't listened to because we didn't have language to talk about it. We
Hmm.
didn't have the language of, oh, this is an aesthetic value that has to be, you know, acknowledged. It was just kind of
So let me,
easily dismissed
yes,
because,
exactly. Let me say something back because I'm getting a felt sense from what you're saying and I want to check it with you.
yeah.
Um, and I want to put it in as ordinary language as I can. Um, what you're talking about and pointing to, it sounds like, is the experience of appreciation, the experience of beauty, all of the kind of positive human responses to having access to nature, being able to walk through parks and trees and wilderness and mountains, and and then that's where, if that part is correct, I come up to the and,
Mm.
because I think it's a big and, because I'm thinking, if people actually get the language and get some kind of validation for these experiences, which is part of what you're working on, it sounds like,
Mhm.
um, then the experience goes deeper in some way.
Mhm.
And it may go beyond purely the experience of beauty. This is such a gorgeous place, and it might go into something even deeper.
Mhm.
I'm wondering what you think about that.
Yeah, uh, absolutely. It goes into something deeper. And actually, well, I'm not sure if saying it goes into something deeper is the right way to say it, because
Hmm.
I think this deeper is already there.
Hmm.
But being aware of, um, yeah, I think it's important that we get language to talk about these values, because um, becoming aware that this is happening, that there's actually something, very meaningful going on when I just, look at the view outside my window and,
Hmm.
or go for a walk by the river. There's something deeply meaningful going on,
Hmm.
that if I'm aware of that, then I'm more likely to kind of take it in kind of more
Hmm.
deeply.
Hmm.
Or yeah, just being aware of it and kind of opening myself up to it even more, you
Yeah.
know I'm aware of it.
Yeah.
But I've been uh, when we talk about the experience of beauty, we often think that it's just about, I'm looking at something that catches my eye,
Yeah.
it's like
Exactly.
it's a pleasurable kind of, and often people relate it to something very kind of superficial, or
Yeah.
and beauty has been kind of narrowed down in that way. But what I found, because I kind of had to take on this concept because it's so closely related to landscape, especially in the Icelandic language. So I had to kind of dive into what beauty is
Hmm.
with my PhD, and and then I found, through kind of understanding it through a phenomenological perspective and through Merleau-Ponty's philosophy, that beauty is actually something so profound,
Hmm.
and it's such a kind of deeply, at the core of being human, to experience this, and it's an experience that kind of allows us to sense how we are, not separate from the world, that we are kind of, there is no boundary between me
Hmm.
and what I'm experiencing. I kind of am allowed to notice that through beauty. And I've been doing a little microphenomenological study of experiences of beauty in nature in recently, and it really astounds me how in different experiences of beauty in nature, just from looking at a cloud, or seeing a horse, or looking at the waterfall, or whatever it is, being with a tree, there's always this, when you dive deeply into what is actually going on,
Hmm.
there is this deeply relational kind of
Hmm. Let
happening.
me, yeah, let me say that back to you, because that, I mean, that seems really important, but also just profound. And I love it. Um, I agree with you. When people talk about beauty, they're often referring to an object.
Mhm.
It's a kind of objectifying of something.
Mhm.
And it can feel quite superficial, even walking through, the woods or something, and somebody going, "Oh, look, beautiful! What a beautiful bird!" It can feel sort of alienating.
Mhm.
And you're talking about, well, what is the experience of beauty really if we actually open up to it and allow it to carry us further somehow? And then it becomes something, and this is where the words fail me, and I'm curious to know if you've found words for this, but it becomes something much more open, much more connecting, much more of an experience of I'm a part of this or something. Is that
Mhm.
right?
Yeah. And it becomes like for me it's really and this is where the connection with focusing also maybe comes in,
Hmm.
because for me beauty is like a teacher in listening in a way, because or it can become like a teacher because um beauty, this kind of having your attention towards kind of tuned into beauty, and this can happen intentionally that you go out and you are, you want to go and open yourself up to beauty, but most often it also just happens randomly. You're just out there and then something happens that captures your attention and,
Hmm.
and, uh, and what happens in these moments of beauty um, is that everything else, usually, there was a French philosopher, Pierre Hadot, who talked about that we have like three basic approaches to the world. There's the practical approach, which is kind of, I'm going from A to B, I need to survive, I need to get food and shelter, and, just this me going there to get something,
Hmm.
and then there's the scientific approach, which is, categorizing, classifying, this is naming everything and, kind of organizing it. Um, and then there is the third mode, which is the aesthetic mode, which is perceiving just to perceive,
Hmm.
and in that mode it's a receptive mode, so it's a listening mode, where in the two other modes we are kind of projecting, I
Hmm.
have my ideas about where I'm going, what's practical for me, and I'm projecting that onto the world.
Hmm.
And in the scientific mode, I'm projecting my classifications and categorizations onto the world, but in the aesthetic mode we are just receiving. It's like and I often use this example, like it's like the difference between, the farmer who is looking at the clouds and looking, oh, it might rain, I need to go out and, get my hay and, before it rains. Or the, meteorologist, oh, these clouds look like, I have to make my forecast a little bit differently because, classifying the clouds. And then the person who's just looking at the clouds and just looking at the clouds.
Hmm. Hmm.
And when we allow ourselves to just perceive
Hmm.
and just stay in that, kind of dwell with something, in this receptive mode, we are kind of like opening up to receiving meaning from the world in a way,
Well, that's my question. I totally agree with you. But what is it that we're dwelling with
Mm,
then?
mhm,
If, for example, we're receiving the clouds,
mhm,
which is different from looking at the clouds.
mhm,
We're receiving them, and then we're dwelling with what is that
mhm.
we're attending to that's different from, scientific attending or any of that other stuff.
That's a good question. I think, we are what we are attending to is we are attending to like what does looking at that or hearing that or sensing that, what does it create in me, you know,
Hmm.
how do I resonate? You
Hmm.
know, what does this make me feel, you know? And 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 then we allow ourselves to dwell there, and then, you know, something pops up, you know,
Hmm.
something comes from there, you know, and something comes from there that maybe tells me something about my relation with the cloud or with the world, you know,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah. I find it I at least find it very difficult territory to talk about without um, splitting it
Mm,
into the other kinds of experiencing.
mm,
Because when I imagine looking at the cloud in the way that you're describing, so that I'm actually receiving it
mhm,
and dwelling with, I am actually dwelling with a feeling or maybe a felt sense of that, not just that cloud. It
mhm,
becomes less
mhm,
subject object kind of relationship for me, I'm thinking.
mhm,
And the question is, so what am I dwelling with? And it feels like it's a moment of um, where I witness the world's entrance into me in some way. There's something that feels um, more, it's so hard to say. And I'm curious to see if any of this resonates for you, but more like where life or where nature is more than showing me my place in it, more like almost inhabiting me.
mhm,
And I'm witnessing that. I'm witnessing my um, not separateness from it.
mhm. Yeah, exactly. This is exactly, you know, the type of experience that when I have been interviewing people and myself about
Hmm.
the experience of beauty through microphenomenology, this kind of experiencing yourself as not a self, you know, but as
Hmm.
a
Exactly.
as this kind of part of,
Yeah.
you know, that is the kind of core of the experience, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, and that's why, you know, I think it's such an important experience, you know, even the everyday ones that seem so,
Hmm.
you know, insignificant, like this, just, you know, looking out the window and seeing a cloud, you know, it
Hmm. Hmm.
doesn't seem so hugely profound as, like, you know, coming to this spectacular waterfall or
Yeah.
on top of a mountain in big valley, or, you
Yeah.
know, these kind of images of beauty that we have, like this spectacularness, you know. Uh, but it's just in these tiny everyday moments that this profoundness is there. It's in those moments also, even though sometimes when we are in these spectacular places, it more easily becomes somehow, you know, obvious.
Or
But
sometimes it's, I guess in my experience, sometimes I go to a spectacular site like that expecting to
yeah,
feel
exactly.
something, and somehow I can't get it. It's like
Yeah, yeah,
it's too visual or something. I can't
yeah, yeah,
access.
yeah,
Uh,
exactly.
why do you think nature it well, maybe you wouldn't agree. I'm thinking that nature has a specific ability. It's more evocative of these kinds of experiences for some reason. And if
Mm,
that's true, how does nature have that power for us?
mm, yeah, I mean, I guess, you know, I wouldn't confine these type of experiences to nature. I think we can also experience them in, you know, man-made environments and in art.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe it's a question of accessibility, because sometimes, the layers of culture and meaning, that are on top of, man-made things and on art. And sometimes, with art, it sometimes, for many people, contemporary art, unfortunately, has become this kind of place that many people feel like, this is not for me. I don't understand this. People have been kind of somehow made to understand that they need to know so much about art, and they need to be able to have the right interpretation of art or something like that.
Yeah.
And I would really love it if people could approach, art in the same way as they maybe have the freedom to do in nature. There's no one asking you to interpret nature in the correct way. So it's just this kind of, maybe that is a part of it. I'm just thinking this now when you say it, that we have this absolute freedom of, interpretation, or there isn't even any pressure to interpret anything. You just kind of, you can just allow yourself to be there. So I think maybe that's one reason, that maybe, some kind of like cultural meaning and interpretation and language can get in the way when we are experiencing, man-made things. But also maybe it's just to do with partly also that we are natural beings as bodies, and this is just something that is deeply ingrained in us, through the ages, to, have this kind of responsiveness.
We recognize our nature in nature.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
The other thing I was thinking as I was listening to you is I can see out your window
Mm.
the nature there, which is really nice to see as we talk about this. And I'm thinking maybe also not only is nature kind of more immediate, it has less layers on top of it, but also often it's beyond our control. If you walk through the woods, you can't start weeding the woods. There's far too much there. And maybe there's something quite liberating in thinking, I can't control this, therefore I'm allowed to be here.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, yeah, that could be some kind of yeah. There's no need for me to do anything here somehow.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it doesn't call upon me in that way.
Yeah.
Can I ask just a question? You've used the term a couple of times, and Donata has as well. And I have a guess what it's about, but I've never heard it actually explained, is microphenomenology. Could
Oh,
you
yeah.
just say a little bit about that?
Hmm. So this is a method that was developed by Claire Petit-Manchon, who's a French philosopher,
Mhm.
and it was kind of in the context of neurophenomenology and this kind of this kind of research context of the neurosciences. Francisco Varela was her, I think he was her supervisor in her PhD and, collaborator. And he was saying at the time, we have all of these great methods to measure what's going on in the brain, when we're experiencing different things.
Mhm.
But we need a scientific method for experiencing also, for what's going on in experience at the same time as something is going on in the brain, what's going on in experience. So Claire took on on that kind of call to create this scientific method for looking at experience in great detail, and she based it on another interview method developed by Pierre Vermeersch, and that interview method was specifically aimed for, people who are like practitioners of something, that really have a deeply ingrained like bodily knowledge of doing something,
Hmm.
maybe some crafting or something, that they do with their hands, but they can't really explain what they're doing to teach it to others because it's just something that they intuitively, kind of know what to do. And so Vermeer's method was kind of aimed at helping people to describe how they are doing things. So Claire, based on that, created this kind of interview method for research context.
Hmm.
And really, the core of the method is like helping the person who is describing their experience to describe the how of the experience and not the what.
Hmm.
But we are very used to have our attention always on the what of experience. But this allows us to describe how we are experiencing things. So it's very kind of detailed and helps us to become aware of layers of experience that we are not aware of, and it shows us how much is really going on at each moment. The method kind of relies on just looking at very short moments of experience
Hmm.
and kind of harness, all the details that are there, and it can be really profound to learn, how much is going on at each moment that we couldn't be aware of, it would just, yeah.
It immediately makes me think of a therapeutic example, and I'm curious to know if this is at all similar to what you're describing. If a client is encouraged to remember an incident
Mhm.
that happened like a week ago or a year ago or something, and as they remember it, they have feelings about it again, and
Mhm.
they kind of can go back into the feelings and describe in much more detail what actually they had experienced at the time. I mean, it's almost as though they have access to so much more of it a year later in some ways.
Yeah.
And is it just that descriptive process of describing more and more, not the event,
Mhm.
but the felt meaning of it sort of in for them?
Yeah, I mean, it can be, well, the goal is not maybe to explore the felt meaning for them, although
Hmm.
that sometimes becomes a side product, but the goal is to, for example, in my this study that I'm doing on the experience of beauty, I
Hmm.
take interviews with many different individuals about many different experiences of beauty.
Yeah.
Um, and I try to, get a sense of like what happens, how does it happen? How does beauty happen, and what are the phases that, that this experience has, and kind of learn kind of how this experience has a structure. And then I look at all the different, and then there's also like a method of analysis that allows me to, from all of these different interviews, to get a sense of a generic structure of this type of experience.
Hmm. Okay.
So, so, so it's more, that's the goal of the research method, to get a hold of these kind of generic structures of experience.
Yeah.
But of course, for each person who is interviewed, I mean, you get like when I'm interviewed about my experience of beauty in nature, I gain some kind of like understanding of the felt
Hmm.
meaning of that. But that's not the goal of the research method, perhaps.
Okay, so let me say that back to you. The goal of the research method really is to uncover the basic sort of generic structure of the experience of beauty, for example.
Yeah.
Um, what I had thought, maybe wrongly, is that it shows up specifically in the interview itself. Is microphenomenology a way of interacting with the participant or co-researcher so that they do bring more detail, or is it just something you do in the analysis?
No, I mean, this is the the interviewer interviewee
Mhm.
relationship is very important,
Yeah.
and it's the kind of how we do the interview is
Mhm.
really important, and we have to kind of the interviewer is in the role of kind of helping the person describe,
Mhm.
come as close as possible to this experience and
Mhm.
describe it as closely as possible.
Mhm.
And there's always this kind of very careful kind of being with and
Mhm.
allowing also for, the person who is describing their experience at any point to stop, if it
Mhm.
becomes
Mhm.
too much or,
Mhm.
something like that. So it's very, yeah, it's very specific, like how it's done. And this,
Mhm.
yeah.
One more question. Um, is it so would the interviewer ask sort of very open questions? Like, could you say more about that kind of open question prompts and reflect back what they've said?
Yes,
Yeah.
that's the key thing, that the interviewer, there are always like content-free questions, really. The only content put into the question comes from
Yeah.
repeating what that person said.
Yes, exactly.
So you would, as an interviewer, just ask the person to, firstly, you would guide her to kind of evoke the moment, to go
Hmm.
back to the moment that you want to explore.
Hmm.
And then you would, ask her to describe what happened first, and then they will describe what happened, and then you will ask them, okay, when this happened, how did that happen? When this
Hmm.
happened, to ask the people always to kind of come back to the moment, to go deeper,
Hmm.
and reflecting back regularly, yes, and the questions are always based on reflecting back, really, you know.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
reflecting
Hmm.
back is also a way to, help the person to stay in the moment, to stay with
Yeah.
the experience.
Yeah. Yeah. It reminds me very much of working as a focusing oriented existential psychotherapist and that attempt to try to work phenomenologically with the client by staying with an experience and going deeper and deeper, mostly from reflecting and asking open questions that follow on from something that they have said. So it sounds like there is a similarity, even though the intention
Yeah,
is different.
yeah, yeah.
Um, it's the side effect of the interview is the main effect of the therapy's use of a similar.
Exactly. Yeah,
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 it's
exactly.
interesting to me.
Yeah,
But
and I think I've often experienced this, that there are things that are relevant and interesting and important in philosophy and in psychology, or psychotherapy,
yeah,
that there are these parallels. We are dealing with human experience, of
yeah,
course, and we
yes.
are coming at it from different pathways, uh, but there's so many places of connection. And
Hmm.
sometimes I think, and and I had these kind of conversations with psychologists that I've met, like, why aren't these two fields in more conversation,
Hmm. Hmm. Definitely. Certainly, existential psychotherapy does have some overlap with philosophy, but not enough, and certainly not enough in terms of the process of
Mm.
investigation.
Yeah, and
Um,
maybe this is also like, because in philosophy, I mean, this is what we have been working on together, with Sigga and Donata, all of these kind of research projects where we are working with Gentlin's methods and kind of wanting to bring them
mhm.
into the academic environment and into the philosophical environment. I mean, um, and that's a response to maybe a lack of awareness and discussion about practice of philosophy, like
Yeah.
about like methodology
Mhm.
of like how we engage with each other to help each other think and all of that.
Mhm.
This is something you know new kind of, although it's also very ancient,
Mhm.
but kind of newly coming back into philosophy. And maybe that's also where this connection comes more into the forefront. And, you know.
It's interesting that excites me that that's coming back into philosophy. I think at the same time as we're sort of losing it in psychotherapy. And
Mhm.
psychotherapy is tending towards the much more kind of scientific, neuroscientific sort of naming and categorizing and objectifying of experience. Yeah. Anyway, uh, I'm curious, you've mentioned landscape a couple of times,
Mhm.
and I'm wondering what you mean by that word, landscape.
Mhm. Yeah. Um, when like I said before, when I came back from doing my studies in the UK, I got this concept kind of
Hmm.
handed to me.
Hmm.
Uh, and when I was studying environmental aesthetics in the UK, when people spoke of the landscape model of aesthetic appreciation, that would be put in the category of the visual model, you know. When we talk about landscape, it's just this visually looking over, you know. And and then when I came here to Iceland and was kind of given this concept and this discourse on landscape, you know, that was happening here, I quickly realized that, you know, this aesthetic value of landscape was absolutely not visual, you know, not only visual. Of course, there's a visual component, but it's not only visual. It's something much bigger than that. And um, and then and there seemed to be like a parallel between like landscape, the aesthetic, and beauty. You know, these concepts had all been kind of often seen as either only subjective or only objective. You know, like landscape is an object, you know, beauty is in the form, the aesthetic is, you know, this kind of form and visual. And or it is seen as, you know, it's just in each individual's experience, you know.
Hmm.
So I was, you know, learning that all of these concepts actually are not either or. It's exactly these concepts are concepts that are describing this intertwining, you know, this place of like there are no boundaries between the object and subject, you
Hmm.
know. And landscape is very in the Icelandic language. It's very connected with beauty from the start, and uh, and it appears in Icelandic language much earlier than the English landscape concept that comes with the kind of Dutch landscape painting tradition.
Hmm.
My colleague Edda Voge, who's a geographer who was doing her PhD on landscape at a similar time, but from a different perspective, she found examples of this word from the I think from the 12th or 13th century from the sagas here in Iceland, and then it was often used in the context of, you know, people were coming here to this island and they saw that they came with their boats to shore, and they saw that there were mountains and beautiful landscape and that they could live there. You know, so it's kind of like and at first, when in the first examples it is written not landslag. In Icelandic, landscape is landslag, and lag can mean a form and a layer also, but it was in the earliest examples written landsleg, and leg means a place where something can lie. And today it's mainly used for a woman's uterus, you know, so where the embryo lies in the
Hmm.
uterus.
Hmm.
And I think that really kind of shows this relational understanding of landscape, that landscape is, you know, its environment when perceived aesthetically, when perceived in this way that we've been talking about, when you
Mhm.
are really taking in,
Mhm.
and, okay, I'm a part of this.
Yes, yeah.
Uh, we don't use this word when we are projecting our own meaning on it. We use it when we are talking about being in this receptive mode of kind of being a part of something. And yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting to me. When you're talking, I'm immediately imagining walking my dog out in the fields and how that landscape changes, really changes the way I could say changes the way I experience myself, but maybe it changes the way I am
Mhm. Mhm.
in response to that. It's not just visual, it's this the feeling of space and the feeling of the ground and the lack of trees and all of that. Um, it makes me wonder a little bit if landscape has this kind of interactive role in our development
Mhm.
as we develop physically and psychologically, if the landscape is in there.
Yeah.
If even, as children, if you grow up in a particular, or the earth looks a particular way, and you interact with that part of the earth, if it is actually structured into you.
Yeah. I mean, I would definitely say, I mean, I think like Gentlin, you know, said, body is environment,
Mhm.
it's body environment,
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
it's, there is no separation. So of course,
Mhm.
I think, we are our environments, and the environments that we are in, they shape us. And
Yeah.
that's why also, I mean, we've talked about environmental aesthetics and how it emphasizes, the importance of having the opportunity to experience beauty in natural environments,
Mhm.
but it also has this, you know, way of acknowledging and making us aware of how important it is that we design environments, the human-made environments that
Yeah.
we are in. We need to really carefully design them for people to flourish in them and
Yeah.
not to shut down,
Yeah.
because many of our human-made environments are kind of so kind of noisy and difficult that
Mhm.
we shut our senses down to
Mhm.
protect ourselves from not taking in too much negative kind of
Mhm.
stimuli from the environment. So I think this aspect of what environmental aesthetics can teach us is also really important. The negative aesthetics, and how
Mhm.
to be aware of that also. How important it is that we try to foster positive aesthetic experiences in all our environments.
That is so interesting. So it's not just that people coming down from the glacier
Mhm.
care more about the environment because they feel it
Mhm.
rather than they're lectured about it.
Mhm.
It's also that that feeling is a guide to the kind of environment that is more flourishing for human existence.
Mhm. Mhm.
Like we could, for example, if I follow you, we could, for example, ask ourselves, what would the city look like if it felt like this?
Mhm. Yeah.
And see how the design flows from that.
Yeah, 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 exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting to me. I know we're up to time, but I'd like to ask one last question if I can.
Mhm.
Um, just to say on that landscape thing, my own research was, as I said before, on home.
Yeah.
And one thing that I found that I could never quite answer, and maybe what you're saying now hints at a way of understanding it, is that sometimes people leave their homes because they never really felt at home there.
Mm.
So people can have all sorts of responses to their home.
Mhm.
Not everyone loves their home and feels welcome.
Mhm.
Um, However, it did seem from the people I spoke to and I've spoken to recently over the years that everyone cannot shake their first environmental place, their place of origin,
Mm,
retains some special significance, even if it's something that they're terrified that they would have to return to at some point. It somehow can't just be brushed away as though that piece of the earth is like any other.
mm,
It retains some kind of specialness, even if it isn't a long for place to live.
yeah, yeah.
And I'm wondering if some of the things you're saying might
Mm,
help us understand that a bit.
mm. Yeah, I mean, maybe just you know, I think that like through our experiences, and through our aesthetic experiences and kind of sensing, which maybe we are more open to that as children. As
Yes.
children, we're just constantly aesthetically experiencing the
Yeah.
world.
Yeah.
So we're kind of taking it in so much.
Yeah.
And then it really, through aesthetic experiences and repetitive
Mhm.
aesthetic experiences,
Mhm.
we start having a very strong relation to a place. It becomes a part of us.
Yes,
And
literally.
I've interviewed people about their relation to a landscape that potentially will be altered because of new dams being built in a river or something like
Mhm.
that. And people have described it as, it's like losing a part of myself. It's
Yeah.
like, take off my arm if you take that river away. It's
Mhm.
like it really physically like feels so kind of a part of you.
Yeah.
So I think that might be and maybe I'm just thinking out loud as you said this, that maybe it is because in our early childhood we are so even more deeply open to kind of let the environment become part of us, that that
Mhm.
that that connection just is there,
Yeah,
as a, yeah,
like it really shapes our elaboration.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
There's an Australian sociologist that wrote about that experience about place bereavement, he called it,
yeah,
where a loved place is lost under a
yeah,
dam or whatever. Yeah.
exactly.
So the last thing I'd love to ask a little bit about is m- your interest in tourism.
Mm,
And having had this conversation with you now, I'm guessing
mhm,
that it is sort of an exploration of the possibility of tourism not being sort of running around from country to country looking at things and taking photos of things, but instead this more aesthetic appreciation.
yeah, 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 exactly. I mean, I have been um well, I wouldn't say that I've been, deeply interested in tourism, but I've just been in an environment where I've worked with people who are working in tourism studies and, collaborating with them and kind of reflecting on these kind of issues that are, so kind of also so obvious here in Iceland, which happens to be a very popular tourism place in the last 10 years or something like that. And also, well, I think it kind of started out of my PhD project, where I was with people going on glaciers, and this was back in 2008, and there was no one else on the glacier except this one group, and people were having these profound experiences, and and then tourism has grown so quickly since then, and it's like just people everywhere, many groups on the glacier at the same time, and it seems to, this kind of everyone just going quickly around the country,
Mhm.
taking their selfie. Oh, I've been to this waterfall and I've been to this glacier, and it seems that they are maybe approaching nature as an object and a spectacle,
Yes.
rather than having this profound experience, and this kind of approaching it as a spectacle becomes in the way of them really experiencing it, and really, coming out from being in Icelandic nature with a new understanding of their own relation to nature in general, and I see it as such an opportunity. We could be, sending thousands of people away with a changed ethical understanding of their relation to nature, but instead we're just sending them home with lots of selfies.
Yeah.
So I see it as an opportunity to, be deeply meaningful for the tourists, and also more meaningful for the people who are the residents of the areas that are being,
Yes.
tourists also,
Yeah.
because when the tourist comes and really listens to what's there, instead of just projecting the image that has been
Yeah.
sold to them
Yes.
by marketing forces, when they really come and listen to what is there and the relations to the land that are there, then the people who live there also feel listened to, in a way that someone is appreciating how they see things, and how they experience the world. So yeah, I think we could do so many things much better in that context.
Yeah. I absolutely agree with you. What you were describing sounds almost like a kind of treadmill tourism.
Mhm.
And maybe what we need is sort of a book on focusing oriented tourism or something.
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
a kind of a deep travel book or something like that.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, like deep ecology.
Yeah.
Is there anything else that you'd like to add? Anything else you're passionate about that we didn't get a chance to cover yet?
Well, there's one more thing that that I'm passionate about, and
Mhm.
that we haven't maybe talked about a lot, but maybe, that's too big of a topic, but that's, the artistic way of knowing, and, how, the kind of artistic research and methods of knowing are really, should get more kind of space and acknowledgement in the academic kind of research context, I think. And the things that I've learned from teaching in an arts university, and being around artists a lot, are really, yeah, they relate to this kind of this source of meaning that is in the aesthetic
Mhm.
experience, that I've been talking about here, and so that's something that I'm always exploring, and kind of interested in, and kind of wanting to kind of embrace more, and learn more about, and kind of bring more into awareness. This kind of, yeah.
It's interesting to me. I really appreciate it and appreciate the difference when, if I'm teaching focusing to a big group, there's artists or like dancers or people like that are there. Um, there is something, and there is a different kind of process that those
Yeah.
people seem to bring. Yeah.
Yeah, they know this, from I've been
Mhm.
teaching, thinking at the edge and focusing to the students and colleagues in my university, and this is so familiar to them.
Mhm.
They know this already, but still, like for me at the beginning, having a name for it is
Mhm.
so important. Having
Mhm.
an awareness of it is so important as an additional kind of, so when these two things come together, something really great can happen, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you very much. I feel you're opening a very rich world.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It was really so nice to have the opportunity to talk to you about it, and thank you for your great questions that prompt new thoughts.
Yeah, thanks very much for saying yes. Yeah, I really appreciate it.
Mhm.
Okay,
Yeah,
I hope that sometime we might meet.
yeah, hopefully.
Yeah, it would be nice. Okay, thanks very much.
Bye
Yeah,
bye.
bye for now.